And then there were four. With the semifinal series coming to a close, the 2025 NBA playoffs are set to continue as we get closer towards witnessing whose turn it is to hold the Larry O'Brien Trophy in June. Will it be Ant Edwards and the fearless Timberwolves, Jalen Brunson and the blue-collar Knicks, Tyrese Halliburton and the high-octane Pacers, or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and the young and hungry OKC Thunder? I certainly can't wait to find out, but in the meantime, today I'll be recapping how each of these teams made it past their semifinals opponents and preview what could lie ahead for them in the next round, as all of them have given tremendous cases of why they could be the ones getting the jewelry this year. But of course, there can only be one. So without further ado, we got a loaded episode for you today. Get your popcorn ready as we get deeper into the playoff action right now on H2DG. Welcome to Hip to the Games, the podcast for you, the basketball junkie and the hip-hop head. I'm your host, Desmond, and I too have had hoop dreams and enjoy the beautiful genre of hip-hop and its history. Together, we will enjoy some of the greatest albums, songs, artists, players, moments, teams, and so much more, while even mixing the two on occasion, all in my hope that you remember why you love both or either of these to begin with. You'll soon understand that Hip to the Games is more than just a podcast, it's a lifestyle. And if you were looking for a platform that combines both basketball and hip-hop, you've come to the right place. Welcome to this episode of Hip to the Games. Shout out to you if you are a loyal listener and are showing that you are indeed hip to the games by listening or tuning in visually for another show. Whether you are listening on your favorite podcast platform or watching on YouTube, I sincerely thank you for all your support. And if you do happen to be new to the H2DG family, welcome aboard. I am happy to have you here. If throughout this episode you like what you're hearing, be sure to hit that subscribe button or that follow button on whatever platform you're listening to or watching on to stay tapped in with all things hip to the games. And before we really get into today's episode, you already know the drill if you've been here before. I got to get my pregame shoutouts out the way. All right, the first one always goes to the creative director, Jesus Christ, for another H2DG episode, as it's always a blessing to get in front of this microphone and do what he's placed in my heart to do. And the second one goes to my 19 Media Group family for the opportunity to represent the home team. All right, you always see that blue and white logo sitting in the corner. That's my home team. That's my home squad, and it's always a privilege to represent them. Be sure to follow everybody on 19 Media Group at 19M Group on Twitter, 19 Media Group on Instagram, 19 Media Group on YouTube, to follow everything going on with the network, all the podcast episodes of the network, the shorts, any content of that nature. We have a variety of shows around sports, music, culture, education. I mean, there's so much more than just the basketball stuff you see a lot of the time from me, and the hip hop stuff. There's so much more that 19 does. So, and we're all some passionate podcasters in this space, man. And I'm sure you can find another teammate of mine to support. They do an excellent job with their own shows and content. So whether it's through likes, comments, reposts, listens, buying merch, any of that kind of support is felt, seen, and appreciated. Now, as we get into today's show, if you are a returning listener, you already know how this goes. But if you are new to the show, this episode is going to be organized by the format that pays homage to the classic hip-hop song structure. All right, I got 3 verses for you today, which represents 3 topics for the show. The first verse, you already know, has to set the tone. The middle one brings the climax or rising action. And then your last verse has to be the haymaker. It has to be the best for last and even bring a resolution in the process. And since we always got to start verse 1 off with a bang, before we really get into these recaps and previews, I got some flowers to give. I want to take my first verse to give some well-deserved flowers. But real quick, with the playoff competition getting more intense now, here's how you can get involved yourself with H2DG's latest sponsor. The NBA and NHL playoffs are here, and the action is heating up on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sports. Don't miss your last chance to add your favorite players from the court and the ice to your Prize Picks lineup. Whether it's points, rebounds, assists, goals, points, or hits, take your pick of more or less for your shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash today by using the promo code CLNS. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander can score 30 in his sleep, so I'll be picking him for more than 30 points for sure. And then Karl Anthony Towns is cleaning the glass like crazy lately, so I'll be sure to get him locked for more than 10 rebounds. Now, Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts and is available in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Prize Picks is truly the best way to win real money with all the various opportunities to play and collect your winnings. This includes the opportunity to turn your playoff hot takes into tickets to basketball's championship series. Starting with the play-in round, every lineup you make on Prize Picks will enter you into the Takes Two ticket sweepstakes, which could get you and a +1 a VIP trip to the ship. Additionally, today is Taco Tuesday, which means every Tuesday, Prize Picks will discount several projections on the board, usually by 15% to 25%. And this Friday, it's also Flex Friday, so make sure you opt in and tap the checkbox in your lineup builder to be eligible for the protected play. You choose squares from any game on the board, and if your lineup does not win, you get your net losses back in promo funds up to your promo limit as soon as the lineup settles. So if you love a quick win, Prize Picks is the way to go. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. So what are you waiting for? Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup and win up to 2,000 times your cash today. Remember, with Prize Picks, it's as simple as picking more or picking less. Again, that's promo code CLNS. Hip to the Games is rocking with Prize Picks, and you should too. Prize Picks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join millions of users and sign up today. Prize Picks, run your game. Tipping off today's show with verse 1, I got some flowers to give. All right, I told you if it happened, I was going to man up, put my pride aside, right? Admit I was wrong and make peace, okay? And all season long, I said I was a non-believer. I said that track meet basketball doesn't work in the playoffs. I said they would lose in 6 games in the semifinals. Passionate, longtime fans have flooded my TikTok comments, even while I was simultaneously praising them and critiquing them, showing me that their basketball town certainly has a presence on social media. And most of all, I challenged this team to prove that last year wasn't a fluke. And if you haven't caught it by now, I got to give my congratulations and my big bouquet of flowers to the Indiana Pacers, man. They have once again made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, and I don't care what happens next round. They've earned my respect. Tyrese Halliburton hit some clutch and momentum swinging shots versus the Cavs that literally made me think of only 2 players, Luka Doncic and Stephen Curry. I mean, he's that same kind of villain that you can't help but respect when he comes to your team's arena. The same way I view Derek White as the Celtics version of Derek Fisher, right? A guy that's always making the timely shots in the clutch and making the timely plays to help his team win. I saw the same things in Andrew Nembhard. Just timely shots in the fourth and good defense. Aaron Nesmith is certainly not that same dude that was riding the bench in Boston. And I said it about the Clippers when talking about energy players. Aaron Nesmith has been the epitome of that. He doesn't jump off the page, right? But his impact is felt every possession, and the Pacers value it heavily. And obviously, I got to shout out Coach Rick Carlisle. After seeing the way his time in Dallas ended, I didn't have much faith that he could return to the franchise he once found success with and pick up where he left off, but I couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, and for GM Kevin Pritchard to assemble this kind of team of unsung heroes is just incredible. They are legit, man. They are legit. And, I spent so much time comparing them to previous teams that I missed the beauty this current team exudes. I've said this before. People hate what they can't understand, right? The default reaction to misunderstanding is hate. It's why Jesus was hated, right? People couldn't believe that the scriptures and the previously prophesied events were right in front of their faces. When I was a kid, I hated math because it was the one subject that consistently gave me trouble, and I didn't want to grow to like it. I didn't want to even get better at it, and I accepted defeat and chose hate because occasionally I would run into something that seemed impossible to solve. As humans, we're too prideful to admit disbelief, misunderstanding, or have a change in opinion oftentimes. And I know I've said this before. One of the main aspects of this platform that I hope you and future listeners grasp is that I always speak on this game from a player's perspective. And I know that can come off like flawed at times, right? Because obviously I'm not in the NBA and things of that nature. But like a lot of Pacer fans on TikTok, I think, tried to subtly come for me a little bit. I think because they figured I was late to their party, and they should feel that way, right? Like you know, all these fans that are catching up, right? They should be able to talk their ish a little bit, right? But I mean, I think they also didn't really realize where I was coming from. Like, it's very easy for me to place myself in a player's shoes because I once wanted to be one. Right? I think I've expressed that on here before. I may not have been good enough to advance in high school, college hoops. You know, I didn't get the opportunities growing up to join the camps and like the AAU, everything, like, and receive that development from an X's and O's standpoint. You know, I grieve that a little bit, even to this day. But one thing about me, I was always watching highlights. I was always watching interviews. I was always watching all kinds of fans or coaches break down this beautiful game that we all love in the effort to learn the lessons I might have missed out on, right? I had to play a lot of catch up. And to this day, like, I love learning new things. I'm always learning new things. But again, one thing about me, man, I studied everything because even with my lack of playing experience, nobody could say I ain't know the game. I'm not the smartest dude, you know, admittedly, like I've envied, you know, again, that's something that I've had to work through. Like I've envied my peers who, from a strategy standpoint, can break down in every possible detail why the Pacers are so good, right? They can break down every possession and give you all the terminology and stuff. Like, I wish I could do that on a more consistent basis. And, you know, I had to come to realize, like, I may not be able to do all that, but I can definitely hang. So I say all this to say it was initially just so hard to believe that a point guard like Tyrese Halliburton could have double-digit assist games with 0 turnovers at the pace NBA basketball is right now, right? And how does a team of unsung heroes make it this far in the playoffs? You just didn't see that a lot coming up. So I'm going down my Rolodex, right? Okay, well, they're kind of like the Spurs, except they don't necessarily have a Tim Duncan. Like somebody they can get the ball to repeatedly, right? They really thrive off each other. And again, don't miss what I'm saying. Tyrese has shown to come through in the clutch. Pascal Siakam, I've said it before, I have a lot of faith in what he can bring for the Pacers half-court offense. But the Pacers just thrive so much off each other. So then I'm like, well, the Steve Nash Suns seem more accurate because they ushered in a new style of basketball. But despite the high-octane offense and the big three of Nash, Amari, Matrix, and great role players, right? Raja Bell, Leandro Barbosa, you know, so many guys on that team. Boris Diaw, you know, they had a lot of great role guys. They still just never won because of teams like the Spurs, the Mavs, and the Lakers. All teams with go-to scorers. The farthest they always made it was the conference finals. So then, in my lifetime, so then you could say, okay, well, maybe they're like J. Kidd's Nets. Right, you got Baby Magic Johnson and athletic guys who can defend, you know, 2 finals appearances, but they were defeated by more complete teams. You know, the 2000 Pacers are very similar to this team that we see today. You know, finals appearance, savvy veterans, and a good backcourt in Jalen Rose and Reggie Miller. But again, they had no answer for Shaq and Kobe at the end of the day. Every NBA that I've known, these type of teams generally don't win. And though my assessments and my comparisons tracked, I missed this one key fact. As much as history has the ability to repeat itself, the beauty of life is seeing things that we've never seen before. And I think even for me, you can get so caught up in trying to like relive the past. It's like, wait a minute, this is a new thing. This is beautiful. We haven't seen this before and we should enjoy that. Like live in the present and enjoy that. And you know, in my lifetime, I've just never seen a team like this. You know, it's been really fun to watch. It's been really fun to watch. And especially for them to be a team that took about 30 games to find their groove again. You know, and I think Kenny Atkinson said it best after they lost Game 5. This team is like a college team in the way that they share the wealth and like to play up tempo. And one thing I really love about the Pacers is that they haven't shied away from their depth in the playoffs. Even the deepest teams like to trim their rotations by the playoffs, right? Because sometimes the few minutes a certain player is in the game can impact the outcome of a series. And in the playoffs, every minute matters, right? So because it's win or go home. So most teams say the longer my best players are out here, the better we have a chance of winning. But again, we've seen how detrimental that philosophy can be for teams like the Lakers, the Cavs, and eventually the Nuggets. The Lakers ultimately fell to the fatigue that comes with playing 7 guys for 48 minutes. The Cavs lost game 2 to Indy in dramatic fashion, and ultimately because they didn't get a couple extra rebounds, right? If you think back to that game, and I remember watching that game, and me and Devon are watching the game, and I'm telling him, like, man, like, they couldn't play Tristan Thompson for 48 seconds? Like, okay, say what you want. You know, he's never been a great offensive player. He's in his, you know, he's more of a veteran now, you know, locker room presence. But you mean to tell me he couldn't play 48 seconds to help you get a rebound? Like, regardless of his role and his reputation, whatever it is, rebounding is why he was drafted 4th overall in 2011. And of course, the Cavs paid for keeping a smaller lineup on the floor and losing that game to some 50-50 balls. Same thing with Denver, a team that could have beat OKC in 5 games. They couldn't find a way to at least try Jalen Pickett when Westbrook, Braun, or MPJ were struggling to shoot. And somehow, despite finding minutes for DeAndre Jordan versus the Clippers, they didn't even consider him with the starters facing fatigue in OKC's double big man lineup. Like, to me, it's those little things, those little stubborn details, why some teams don't win in the playoffs. Because, and so I compare them to the Pacers, right? This is a team who, they haven't done that. They've stuck to what has worked for them. They'll play 10, 11 guys in a playoff series because that's their bread and butter. That's what they know works for them. So it should be no surprise they've made it this far, right? They rock with what they've had in the first place, and they're seeing the fruits of their decision. Everybody's bought in. Nobody feels left out. Even the guys that don't play are as equally hyped as the guy that made a big play, right? The Pacers have a great selfless culture and take pride in shocking the world, man. And despite my claims of them being a mediocre organization due to their fair share of middle of the pack seasons and failed expectations, this is actually a franchise that is no stranger to playoff hoops, and they certainly know what it takes to give their loyal fans a good, fun team to root for, even if they have to be in the lottery for a year or two, or not even saying that. I think they've done this without draft picks, so I actually misspoke there. But for the most part, like, even if the seasons don't always go well, you know, there's been times they've been in the play-in, they've been on the outside looking in, but then they always get right back, right? So that, if anything, that's actually more consistent. Right? That's actually less mediocre when you think about it. Right? So shout out Indy, man. You know, I was wrong, and, you know, it's good to see them, man. And they're quite literally just getting started, because the Indiana Fever are primed to have a special season in the WNBA this year. So we're going to see Indiana, I think, in this space for a long time, hopefully for a long time. But the Pacers are rolling, and no longer am I on my public enemy. I am indeed now a believer in the hype. Yes, sirs, the Pacers are looking like the favorite out east and are showing all the doubters and haters that last year's run was not a fluke. But what do you say, though? I know there's still some doubters out there. I know there's still some believers out there. Are we looking at the Eastern Conference champs right now? Be sure to share your thoughts with me down below if you are watching on YouTube, or at me on the socials at Hip to the Games or Desmond Powell _ to share your thoughts with me, as I'd love to know what you think about the Pacers finals chances. Verse 1 is definitely off to a good start, but now we get into the nitty gritty, man. I'm just getting started, as there is plenty of more playoff talk to come as we transition to verse 2, where I'll be recapping the semifinals matchups. But before that, if you like what you're hearing and want to know how you can show some love to Hip to the Games, here's how you can do that. As a fan of Hip to the Games, not only should you show your love for the podcast, but you gotta express your love for basketball and hip hop. With a wide variety of clothing and accessories, there is always a way to show how much the game of basketball and the game of rap means to you. Let everybody know what it means to be hip to the games by clicking the link in the episode's description to cop some merch and represent the H2DG lifestyle. Welcome back to Hip to the Games, where I am continuing today's episode with verse 2, as the semifinals matchups have wrapped up, and I wanted to share my thoughts on some of the details that stuck out to me from each series, and maybe things that can show up in future matchups. But I want to start with the Celtics and the Knicks. This was probably the most surprising series out of all of them. I think many of us, myself included, envisioned Boston, even in their foolishness at times, coming out of the Eastern Conference, but I did mention this in the playoff preview. It can be very easy for old habits to return when you win a championship. I think there were some Celtics fans who feared they would beat themselves the way that they had versus New York, and others who said, nah, I think they're disciplined enough. And sure, it certainly seemed like it, that they were ready to confirm last year and go back-to-back this year. After all, like I said, they were my preseason pick to go back-to-back. I was rolling with them all year. But after seeing the way they crumbled in not one, not two, but 3 games versus the Knicks, it's clear that they weren't in the same championship mindset this year. They passed up so many 2-pointers and even driving opportunities in favor of threes, right? Some of them they made, some of them they missed. I just don't think that's efficient basketball in the playoffs. Like, you got to take what you get. Even if you think of an individual scoring standpoint, like Iman Shumpert said that about Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving, what makes him so good is that he doesn't care how he scores. And I think the Celtics kind of do. They do care how they score. And sure, it was great last year, but for the most part, I saw a lot of that. They were passing up 2s in favor of 3s, and I just didn't know how I felt about that. And I think, with miss after miss after miss from downtown, it just gave the Knicks more confidence that they could get back into games, right? And now, granted, with Kristaps Porzingis dealing with this lingering illness, Jaylen Brown not having much pep in his step after receiving the knee injection, and Jason Tatum ultimately suffering from the Achilles tear, there were plenty of reasons why the Celtics didn't look like themselves, because they weren't. And that's what sucked about the Tatum injury. Even though the Knicks made a great comeback effort, there were some flashes of, okay, I think the Celtics have woken up. Like, sometimes you got to get knocked on your butt to wake up. You know what I'm saying? And I thought that they were ready to tie up that series and then break the hearts of Knicks fans everywhere. Because I believe if they won Game 4, the Celtics would have won that series. Because it just seemed like that kind of game where had the Celtics won, the Knicks were finished. But after losing Tatum to injury, it became clear that their season would likely end sooner than expected. And definitely, I definitely sent a prayer up for a patient and full recovery for Jason Tatum, man. As, if I'm honest, as sad as I was watching him go through that injury and his reaction and everything, I quickly became excited to see the kind of player he becomes post-injury, as this journey is going to allow him to become even smarter and assess the game from a different perspective and get some well-earned rest even in his younger 8-year career. I'm really excited to see the kind of basketball he plays moving forward. So definitely a patient and full recovery for Jason Tatum, man. We rocking with you. But on the Knicks side of things, for the most part, their success has been a product of not giving up, I feel like. Like, it's Knicks basketball, man. Like, they just play hard every possession on both ends of the floor. Teams like that are generally always in games because of sheer grit, right? I said the same thing about the Clippers in previous episodes. And a few teams have been as good as the Knicks are at doing that. And additionally, this is ultimately why the Knicks traded for Mikal Bridges, right? This series right there, to beat the Celtics in a playoff setting and come out the East. Obviously, the Pacers have since had something to say about that, right? That's going to be an entertaining series, but the Knicks are trending in the right direction. Their defensive versatility, most notably having strong bodies on the perimeter in Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby. I think you can even throw Miles McBride in there. I think that's what made them a quality opponent for Boston. Jalen Brunson is just as strong as Drew. Josh Hart is stronger than Derek White, you could say. Mikal can match up with Tatum's size and length. OG can match up with Jaylen Brown's strength. Like, you can't push and move these guys and bully them around, and I think it gives them the ability to switch everything, right? So Mikal can still guard Brown. OG can take Tatum. Hart can take Drew. There's a lot of versatility there. And so what I believed was once a cheat code for Boston is now a checkmate by the Knicks, right? And another thing I was concerned about this in that series was Karl Anthony Towns' foul troubles. Again, I've been harping on that since the beginning of the season. And unfortunately, his foul troubles continued. He had at least 4 fouls in every game he played. But the difference, I think, this year is that he's been able to play with them. In Minnesota, he would have these 10-point games, and it would serve as the glaring reason why they lost games, because Karl Anthony Towns cannot stay on the floor longer than a few minutes. But this year, that hasn't happened as frequently, as he's still playing 30-plus minute games and getting 20 and 10. But of course, he also has that luxury of having 4 other talented teammates who can carry him to the finish line if need be. So to me, that's still something Cat will have to watch for moving forward. As those 10-point games aren't going to cut it in a series versus the Pacers. Those are usually the games that his team does lose. So, like, he's got to make sure he's producing, and especially if they won a championship. He's got to take some extra pride, I think, too, as the last line of defense and not let these guards trick him into jumping into them. Again, it's much easier said than done on a podcast microphone, but if players know that they can draw contact on Cat and it go their way, he becomes a target. Right? So he's got to control the paint on defense as much as he's able to be a threat down there on offense. Now, aside from this, I've also been impressed with the Knicks finding ways to win despite their short rotations. That was another thing that I feared, and I think many fans feared going into the playoffs. Like, they can easily become a victim like the teams I mentioned earlier, right? But the silver lining is I would say, is that the Knicks have some versatility that the Lakers, Cavs, and Nuggets didn't have. So while their rotations are short, they can still run a few different combos with the personnel that they do use. And as I said, present much better defensive lineups than those teams. Overall, I think the Knicks successfully just wore the Celtics down and made big shots and big plays when they needed them the most. Mikal Bridges, man, being able to hit those mid-range buckets without disrupting the flow of the offense, along with Brunson, it just gives them a dynamic that's hard to guard, especially when they need buckets the most. Having two guys that can get what they want on the perimeter like that is definitely key come playoff time. And then I think Cat, the fact that he's a low post threat, but he's not limited to being, a stretch four either. I think that certainly helps their offensive depth. Nobody's really one dimensional in that regard. Mitchell Robinson has played some decent minutes and has been able to withstand even the hack-a-Mitch moments, right? Deuce McBride, I mentioned him earlier. He's hit big shots, played stiff defense. And I do wish Josh Hart, man, as good as he is, I do wish that he could hit some open middies or floaters, since defenses are darn near guarding him like Draymond Green. Like, I saw that a lot versus Celtics. There are times where Josh Hart, man, if he could just hit that free throw line jumper or hit that dotted line floater on a consistent basis, the Celtics would have to honor that. And then it would probably collapse the defense just a little bit more, and he can kick it out to the shooters like he wants to do. So, I would like to see that more from him. But, for the most part, I'm impressed with the Knicks. I'm not sure how long they can keep it up, but that blue-collar basketball is admirable. It's New York Knicks classic basketball, and it's a reason, why they have a chance at a rematch versus Indiana and potentially winning this series and going to the finals. It's going to be tough, but, there's a chance nonetheless. Now, next up is the Cavs and the Pacers. Now, it sucks that Donovan Mitchell has suffered yet another tough playoff defeat despite holding his end of the bargain. I mean, don't get it twisted, man. Donovan Mitchell is a playoff performer. He has time and time again had big games in the playoffs. It's just that his teams couldn't really supplement what he's doing. But ultimately, aside from early injuries, I think what happened to the Cleveland Cavaliers is exactly what a lot of doubters expected. They got outworked. There were so many possessions where you could tell the Pacers just wanted it more. And what I really disliked was how they would take their foot off the gas with big leads. Aside from Game 3, all the times they had big leads, Games 2 and Game 5, they let up. And this is how I know it was a spirit/fatigue thing. In Games 2, 3, and 5, they played the exact kind of defense I said in my prior episode that teams have to play if they want to beat the Indiana Pacers. From the opening tip, they were in the Pacers' grill. They set the tone early. They hit first. The playoffs is physical. You got to hit first a lot of times. So, forcing guys not named Halliburton or Siakam to make something happen, I thought their efforts were excellent. And again, I got some comments across the socials, along the lines of like, oh, you say this like it's easy, or, it's hard to play that insane defense versus the Pacers. And I'm like, well, basketball is a simple game, man. Like, I don't think it's that much different than what's on the scouting report. And lo and behold, the Cavs did that in 3 out of the 5 games of the series, which is why it's so unfortunate that they could only get one win. In Game 2, they supplemented this defense with Donovan Mitchell just getting to the paint at will, man. He did not let up. Everybody's saying, and again, if you're a Pacer fan, I'm sure that was annoying to watch, but you can't get mad that he was able to penetrate your defense and get what he wanted every single trip down. right? And sure, maybe there was some plays that should have been a no call, right? That's fair, but he was getting to the line a lot because he was getting to the paint a lot. You're gonna have to touch him up to stop him. So it was no surprise to me. And then, I think Max Strus and Sam Merrill, those guys did a great job knocking down key shots in that game too. But I even peeped down the stretch how the Cavs tried to manage the game clock in the second half. I've said this all year. If you follow me on Twitter especially, I've said it all year. Game management is kind of a lost art in today's game because guys get so caught up in the pace. You can get literally lost in the pace that you forget to manage the game. Slow it down. Take your time. Eat that clock. Because the more chances you give the Pacers to come back, they're going to come back. They've shown us that. So, I respected that effort from the Cavs, trying to slow that game down, but it went downhill when they started missing jump shots. Right, when the Pacers pressed full court, when they switched the game plan up a little bit and Donovan Mitchell had to give it up, nobody else could make a play. Max Strus is a dope player, but not a guy you can trust off the dribble. They had to force a shot. All the other guys on the team had to force shots. None of those guys out there could had any of the off dribble skills, that a guy like Donovan Mitchell has. And those misses allowed the Pacers to do what they do best and get out in transition, right? Oh, bet? Tell me only Spider can do something? Bet we in they grill, we forcing shots, we getting rebounds, we out. And that's how the Pacers came back. And so now at this point, the Cavs are getting nervous because that lead is trimming and their legs are dead from all those threes. They can see that their once 20-point lead is now 12 with plenty of hoops left. So the focus becomes, we got to score, we got to score, we got to score. Doug Collins said it best. The best prescription is a made shot. And unfortunately for the Cavs, all the Walgreens and CVS's were closed. So naturally, they are going to sacrifice defense for offense, and it resulted in a crumbling defeat in Game 2. Just embarrassing. But notice, right, in Game 3, the Cleveland Cavaliers brought that same exact defensive effort, even switching to a zone this time that caught the Pacers by surprise a little bit, and it forced them to once again sit with the ball longer than 2 seconds. This is exactly what I talked about in that previous episode. And this time, with guys returning from injury, the Cavs had Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, to bring some extra offense that Donovan Mitchell wasn't getting as much down the stretch in Game 2. So then they had this blowout victory. But then in Game 4, the Pacers, like I said earlier, set the tone. They hit first, and they did not stop. And that made the Cavs zone look like boo-boo, and they just cruised to a dominant Game 4 win. And then once again, right, similarly to Game 2, they closed the series out in a game that started out rough, but opened up once Tyrese Halliburton got hot from 3. He made like 4 straight, all swishes. I mean, you can't do anything when a guy is knocking those down, man. And those again, I said it earlier, those momentum kind of shots, when your star player can pull up from 30 and it's all net, even when they start to contest, it's like, yeah, I knew the Pacers knew, like, okay, yeah, we in this game now. We might as well finish this because, Tyrese, like, he came through with 4 straight 3-pointers that were big for us. So that was a rough game for the Cavs. And, they couldn't hit anything in the second half. Additionally, DeAndre Hunter and Darius Garland, I think they were really disappointing this series. Obviously, their injuries likely played a role, but Hunter, he wasn't nearly as proactive as you would like him to be on both ends of the floor. And I think Darius Garland, he picked up so many silly fouls in this series. And it's like, you got to show a little more mental toughness than that, And I think it hurt Cleveland more than it helped. And aside from a good Game 4, Games 3 and 5 for him were abysmal. Credit to him trying to play through his injury, the toe injury. That's a tough injury to play through. But the Cavs needed his shooting. They needed his playmaking. They needed his mental toughness for more than just one game. And he just didn't do that. In a nutshell, I think the main thing the Cavs were missing this series was creation. Outside of Donovan Mitchell, there was nobody they could trust to get a bucket. Again, this is why all these regular season stats and analytics don't mean jack come playoff time. They don't always mean as much as they did in the regular season. The team with the second best offensive rating in NBA history just got booted out the second round. It's unfortunate because I really thought things would be different for the Cleveland Cavaliers this year. But now it's clear that they need to find a way to get Donovan Mitchell some help offensively and a point of attack defender as well. I hoped, and I said this when he got traded, I was hoping that that DeAndre Hunter would be that for them and fill that role, but that certainly didn't pan out in this series versus the Indiana Pacers. So we'll see what Cleveland decides to do, because I know Donovan Mitchell, he was visibly distraught after losing another playoff series in a similar fashion. So they got to get him some help. Definitely on the offensive side if they don't want the same outcome next season. Now, switching to the West, we got the Timberwolves and the Golden State Warriors. Now, obviously, the big reason this series was shorter than it likely would have been is due to Stephen Curry suffering from a hamstring injury in Game 1. It sucked because the Warriors, much like when they faced Houston, ran off with a convincing road win out the gate, right? They stole home court advantage in Game 1, as Stephen Curry helped set the tone early. He was getting hot early in that first half, but once he went down, so did the Warriors' spirits. Draymond had a good game that game. They were rolling off that momentum early, but you knew as the series progressed, and if Stephen Curry is out for a long time, it's not going to look good. And, even in a game where Minnesota couldn't buy a bucket, right? They still nearly made a comeback in the fourth quarter. That's how bad and how stagnant the Warriors' offense got. So obviously the T-Wolves, they saw this. They kept that in mind the rest of the series, understanding that as long as the Warriors' offense is stagnant, it's an easy W. That's the unfortunate thing about Warrior basketball. It works primarily because of Stephen Curry. And because Jimmy Butler has been dealing with his own bumps and bruises and whatnot, including a report I saw he was under the weather for Game 4, so he didn't play his best. And the most important thing of it all is that he's no longer trying to be a primary option on a basketball team. Right? And Draymond Green hasn't really been a scoring threat since 2016. They literally have a team of role players trying to win playoff games. And credit to Buddy Hield, who has finally seemed to get the gist of what playoff basketball is all about since that Game 7 versus the Houston Rockets. Credit to Jonathan Kuminga being the silver lining in the midst of Stephen Curry's injury, really looking like that threat he was drafted to be. And overall, as a team, they found ways to start games pretty good and even make comeback attempts. But it's just not enough to beat a more complete, rock-solid Timberwolves team. Ant Edwards and Julius Randle are gelling and probably playing the best 1-2 punch kind of basketball we've seen them play all season. The role players are contributing. Jaden McDaniels has continued to make such a leap on offense and make timely shots and pair that with his defensive ability. It didn't look like it at first, but the Timberwolves are set to be in the Western Conference Finals once again. And admittedly, I can't say that I would be surprised if they found a way to make it to the finals. Again, OKC is a very tough opponent. More on that later. But to me, they are almost like the Western version of the New York Knicks. They can put Jaden McDaniels on the best player. And guys like Ant Edwards, Dante DiVincenzo, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, those guys are still around to hold their own defensively. And dare I say it, Julius Randle has fit much better defensively on this team than Karl Anthony Towns did. Something that a lot of people anticipated, going into this season after that trade. Like, this team is solid, man. I said it already. The playoff sleeper may not be a sleeper after all, huh? like they are here in a back-to-back Western Conference Finals appearance. And if I'm flipping back to the Warriors, you feel for Steph because the Warriors were trending upward since that Jimmy trade. They had that fire in them again. They had that sense of belief again. But it was just time for the youngins to shine in the Timberwolves. It was just time for them to shine. I think running it back next year for the Warriors would fare well for them. But the biggest question they have to answer is what are they going to do with Jonathan Kuminga? Because if they can't find a way to let him shine the way he did without Steph, with Steph, they might as well let him blossom elsewhere and find a scorer that can open up the game when they need it the most. Again, this is why they got Kevin Durant in 2016. This is why Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins were so important in 2022. This is why the scoring version of Jimmy Butler is so vital in 2025. Again, me and my guys talked about this on the playoff preview. What version of Jimmy Butler is going to show up? Because they needed buckets, Jimmy, but he don't want to be Jimmy Buckets no more. And so the Warriors can only do so much when you essentially have two Draymond Greens, right, and Stephen Curry. And look how bad it gets when they don't have Steph. If the Warriors really want to give the OGs one last run, getting that piece, or developing Jonathan Kuminga to be that piece and groom him to not play such random basketball to where he can actually play with purpose and make his impact even greater, that's going to be the way to do it. As for the Timberwolves, though, let's see if they can kind of pull a 2006 Heat and bring a new culture for the T-Wolves and their fans and their style of basketball. I think that's the best case scenario if you ask me. Let's see if they can get that trophy. And then lastly, there was the entertaining series between the OKC Thunder and Denver Nuggets. I got a lot to say about this one. Wildly enough, this series should have been a wrap in 5 games. The Denver Nuggets gained control of the series in Game 3. Everything looked like it was on the up. And even in Games 4 and Games 5, I believe it was, yes, the OKC Thunder, they were losing in those games, but then they came back and won, right? OKC showed tremendous resilience overcoming Denver in those games. And everybody was saying it, right? Like, this is the kind of series that matures you, right? This is the kind of series why you believe, okay, the OKC Thunder, they passed their test. Like, these guys are ready to hoist that trophy. It's series like this where you really see who has the heart of a champion, and the OKC Thunder showed that. And the crazy thing about this series, even when it looked like OKC was primed to close it out, Denver forced that Game 7. And while they put up a great fight, I think sticking to their principles on offense, playing through Nikola Jokic, getting an aggressive Jamal Murray, and staying with it in the midst of dry spells, they had a disastrous Game 7. And I wanted to go a little bit more in depth in this recap because I initially felt a lot of Denver's mistakes came on the defensive end. Now, I understand that defenses have become so much more dynamic as the offenses have in this era, but to me, man, it has made the league get way too comfortable leaving shooters open. Because again, it's such a pick your poison league now with so much depth and dexterity. And I know the Thunder have been guilty of having cold spot up shooting stretches like we saw in Game 6. So teams are trying to enforce that by baiting them to shoot. So just anything to keep the ball out of Shea's hands. Trust me, I get it. I understand it. But a majority of the rotational players that the OKC Thunder have, they shoot at least 35% from deep. That's still respectable. I know the three-point shot has increased in value over the past 10 years, so people want to act like unless you're shooting 39% and above, you aren't a good shooter. But 35, 36, 37, 38, that was always seen as a respectable percentage. Like, I'm not going to leave you open repeatedly if you shoot that percentage. I understand you have to play help and recover defense with a guy like Shea out there. You know, when J-Dub's out there doing his thing. You know, we saw similar things with Ray Allen, opposite of D-Wade and LeBron, right? He got a lot of open looks because you just can't guard D-Wade and LeBron one-on-one. But I'm sorry, man, I think it's just stupid to ignore shooters on a consistent basis. You can't just leave Alex Caruso, Cason Wallace, these spark plug guys, and especially Lou Dort, who's a 41% three-point shooter this regular season. You can't leave them wide open. There were just too many times in that Denver and OKC series where the Nuggets were so focused on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander that they left Caruso, Dort, and even J-Dub at times wide open in the corners, just like the Grizzlies did. And I get it, right? Like I said, with the shot clock going down, you'd rather someone else take that shot instead of Shai drawing a foul or getting an and-one, right? Let's make this team fall in love with the three because their spot-up shooting isn't as consistent as it can be. You know, and I was saying too, like, I know the Grizzlies were looking at this Denver series like, man, I wish they were missing those threes when they played us, you know. You know, like I said, the strategy had worked for the most part to let those guys fall in love with the three. But to me, it's like if the Thunder role players especially routinely get wide open practice shots, when those are falling, it's no wonder they go on these crazy runs. Like, I'm old school, so at some point you got to be like, look, Shai can drop 40, but I'm not leaving a guy that's made 2 threes in a row wide open anymore. Like, we got to figure this out. And I've been saying it all playoffs. The Thunder are just too good to leave these guys wide open. Outside of Chet or J-Dub having bad nights, the Thunder struggle the most when Lou Dort and at least 2 bench players are under 10 points. Guys like Caruso and Cason Wallace are good at turning defense to fast break points, so it's tougher to limit them because they're able to do that. But for the most part, these guys, Caruso, Wallace, Dort, Aaron Wiggins, they're either going to shoot the three or drive. You close out too hard, it's a blow by. You close out too weak, it's a 3 in your eye. They need more attention than most teams think. So I initially emphasized you have to live with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander beating you single-handedly so it decreases the spark that his teammates have provided offensively all season long. It's like the old adage, right? Basketball is like a fist, okay? 5 fingers working together to deliver a punch. The Thunder are one of the best teams at drawing energy from each other. Obviously, you can't punch without all 5 of those fingers together in a closed fist. It's not going to be as impactful, right? So if you can cut off a couple fingers, right, limit the production of a couple players, that strike won't be as impactful. So that's why if I'm David Adelman, who's done a great job, by the way, since taking over after Mike Malone got fired, I would have considered starting Peyton Watson after Game 4. And I know he's not much of an offensive threat, but because Aaron Gordon and Peyton Watson, they showed to bring that hustle, that defense, and that energy and help Jokic on the glass against a double big lineup that the OKC Thunder have. You know, I thought that would have been a good decision. You know, I respect MPJ heavily for playing through the shoulder injury, but he's the type of player that solely gets his rhythm from offense. He showed time and time again this series that he will not give you that effort because he only feels involved when he's getting buckets. As much as we want everybody to play on both ends of the floor, some players are just like that. So in a series versus OKC, although he did improve a bit in Game 6, I felt it wouldn't have been a terrible idea to start Peyton Watson and see if Michael Porter Jr. can find a spark with the second unit in non-Jokic minutes. Right? You want to shoot? Okay, well, you do it off the bench and give us a spark then. Right? Yet, all that said, the Thunder still couldn't hit open shots. So, the everybody but Shai strategy seemed to be paying off. But just when it seemed like the window was closing for OKC, they did what they do best. Turn defense to offense. Alex Caruso and certainly Cason Wallace single-handedly changed the game with their defense in Game 7. Shai had 35 and it felt like he had 18. That's how crazy the Thunder were on defense when I was watching that game. Caruso did an excellent job fronting Jokic in the post and forcing him to catch the ball much further than he wanted to. And even in other games that series, I was yelling at my TV, man, the Nuggets have got to find a way to where Jokic is not catching the ball 5 feet behind the three-point line. Like, he wants to operate in the mid post and or even the low post. And the Thunder did an excellent job saying, no, you're catching it out here and making the offense harder. The playoffs, baby, it's all about will, right? It's all about who's going to make that adjustment. And the Thunder did that excellently, man. And, you know, Cason Wallace, he was in the passing lanes. He was guard 94 feet. He was hounding Jamal Murray off ball and just having those active hands, just doing what great defenders do. You know, they changed the pulse of the game. The Nuggets tried to force feed their star and didn't know how to get him the rock. I've said it before. The post-entry pass is such a lost art these days. That's why we need a little bit more point guards in this league than just these kind of do-anything guards, like, if that makes sense. Guards that can just handle the ball. Like, no, we need point guards and floor generals in this NBA to make those post-entry passes. Because the Nuggets made such lazy efforts to get Jokic the ball to where the Thunder, they were timing those steals like it was nothing. Because they got so predictable on offense. Oh, they're just going to give it to Jokic. They're just going to give it to Jokic. And they don't feel confident to do anything, right? So you know the ball is coming to Jokic. You just got to time that steal. It was wild to see that. You know, Denver's offense looked so totally different from the first 10 minutes of Game 7, where they found success. So I think going into the offseason, they need to focus on shooting and defense, right? You got to get some shooters so teams can't afford to send 2 to 3 bodies on Nikola Jokic. Their eyes should be on Gary Trent Jr., if there's a lane for that, Seth Curry, Luke Kennard, or sleeper picks like Lindy Waters, Doug McDermott. Like, there are shooters out here. Get somebody. Get somebodies. And then ideally, I think they should find a 3-and-D wing to start. A major bonus if he can make plays off the dribble too. And who does that sound like? Sounds like they should throw their name in the Jonathan Kuminga sign and trade conversation. Because for me, if that means moving on from Michael Porter Jr., I think it's time to make that call. Michael Porter Jr. can shoot all the threes he wants in Golden State. And Denver, they could use the aggression that Jonathan Kuminga plays with and the talent that he is. At least he's able to put the ball on the floor and do something. and give effort on defense. But if that doesn't work out, I think then you should pivot and try to steal a Brook Lopez maybe from Milwaukee, or get Clint Capella, who's a free agent this offseason, to shore up that interior presence, because that's another weakness that the Nuggets have. You know, they're a little soft in the interior. So a lineup to me of Jamal Murray, Christian Brown, Aaron Gordon playing the 3, you got Jokic at the 4 even, and then like a Lopez or Capella would be nice, because Jokic wouldn't have to be the last line of defense and carry that responsibility. And I think more so with Capella, right? I think it gives them an extra body for rebounds and a lob threat when Jokic or Gordon come off short rolls, right? Anybody that comes off short rolls and has a lob threat, we see that with the Golden State Warriors. It's money all the time. It gives them I think it gives them a little bit more what they can do offensively. And not to mention, traditional power forward center lineups are becoming cool again. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to consider that. I think Brook Lopez would bring interior defense and stretch the floor, creating that 5-out offense. So a couple options for Denver as they look towards the offseason there. But they definitely have some growing to do after the series collapse that they had versus the OKC Thunder. And I think it exposed some things that they got to address. So, that was definitely more of a 48-bar verse as opposed to the traditional 16, but it was certainly warranted as the semifinals games featured some good matchups and intense competition. But what are your thoughts on the teams that were bounced and the teams that advanced? Drop your thoughts in the comments on whatever platform you're on, or feel free to hit me up on the socials. I'm going to take a quick break, but don't touch that dial, as we'll be finishing today's loaded episode with the last verse previewing the conference finals matchups. What's up? I'm Desmond, and I'm the host and creator of Hip to the Games, a podcast from 19 Media Group. From hot topics across the NBA, how can you say we done with the 80s or we done with the 90s, yet that's who we learned from? To album reviews and song breakdowns and everything in between, I take immense pride in genuinely appreciating the brilliance of basketball and hip-hop's past and present. If you too love the game of basketball and the game of rap, that means you're hip to the games. But no matter where you fall on that spectrum, I'm sure you'll find your place in the H2DG family, and I encourage you to join the fun. He has a little more knuck if you buck, if you will. Every other Friday on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube, courtesy of the home team, 19 Media Group. Welcome back to H2DG for the last verse of our time together today, and it only made sense to end the show for this Haymaker verse, previewing the conference finals matchups that are now set. And since I started off with the East semifinals earlier, let's start with the West for the conference finals this time. So, OKC Thunder versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. I tweeted it, man. There is actually a lot to look forward to in this series. Ant-Man is riding the high of arguably being the best competitor in the NBA. He's knocked off veteran champions over his last 2 playoff runs, and you have to think he's geeked to have the chance to knock off the NBA's best team this season. That said, even with his improved 3-point shot, electrifying slashing ability, and growing mid-range game, I'm anxious to see how he deals with the flurries of Lou Dort, Alex Caruso, and Cason Wallace. Because the thing about these matchups in particular is that all of those defenders are just as strong as Ant. It's so funny that people compare OKC to football players, mainly because people feel like they foul a lot, which could be true. I like, good physical playoff basketball, but, in some ways, they really are football players. Cason Wallace is a Ed Reed-esque ball hawk. Alex Caruso isn't afraid to use his body, a la Troy Polamalu, right? And Lou Dort is Brian Dawkins. In your grill, never tripping about a whistle. He is just always going to be in your grill. Those are guys you cannot one-on-one to death. Some of the best ways to score on these type of defenders is off screens and in post-up situations. I'm sure there will be moments where Ant cooks from the 3-point line and off the dribble, but this is where triple threat moves and less is more buckets have to come into play. Again, Caruso and Wallace are tremendous off-ball defenders too. And what killed the Nuggets was running the same actions over and over and over and over and over again. If the T-Wolves can't overcome OKC, I would imagine that this would be the next thing for Ant Edwards to learn. How to mix up his buckets. Because if you're potentially facing 3 different intense defenders, you're going to have to find a way to be effective with different looks offensively. You can't keep doing the same thing. They're going to sit on your moves. Having a bag isn't limited to dribble moves. Can you get open off the ball? Can you post? Can you use pick and roll? Can you ISO? Can you triple threat? Can you dribble? I hope the young hoopers come across this and understand this. Hermes bags are more fancy, but a JanSport got more pockets. Okay? And that's just me talking about Anthony Edwards. Additionally, Julius Randle isn't off the hook either. I've been so proud of his growth this postseason, but this is the first series where he's not going to have a guy his size or smaller guarding him, right? It's likely going to be Isaiah Hartenstein. I don't anticipate Julius Randle being able to move him as easily as he did a guy like Draymond Green. And I fear that as a result, he will put his Jumelo Ranthony shooter sleeve on and proceed to take these contested jumpers. You know what I'm saying? Which might as well count as a turnover, especially with a defense like OKC's. But on the flip side, here's this. He will be able to draw Isaiah Hartenstein out the paint, which could limit Isaiah's ability to impact the defensive glass. So again, you kind of wonder, after its success in Game 7 versus Denver, is Mark Daigneault going to run a Shea, Caruso, Dort, J-Dub, and Holmgren lineup full time now, just so they have some better perimeter defense flexibility, even if it probably favors Julius Randle more? So like right there, Chris Finch and his staff have to prepare to respond to both of these lineups at some point, especially if Julius can draw iHeart out the paint consistently, because then he kind of has, you could say, a mismatch with Jalen Williams, or, you know, he's going to have to find ways to still be effective with a bigger body with Isaiah Hartenstein. So I'm anxious to see how they deal with that. Now, next up, though, in this conversation is Jaden McDaniels. I've mentioned his growth off the dribble in previous episodes. We know he can lock up defensively, and at 6'9", he's going to be a defensive body that Shea has yet to see on a full-time basis this playoffs. And the biggest thing he's going to try to do is, you guessed it, get Jaden in foul trouble. Because this is why Shea is so tough to guard. If you are a Scottie Pippen Jr. or a Christian Brown, you're either the same height as Shea or shorter. So when he pump fakes, those guys are more prone to jump because they know they have to try to contest the shot. The detail that's different about Jaden McDaniels is that he will already have the height advantage, so he can afford to sit on the fake and use his length to affect the shot without leaving his feet. But if he's too anxious to get the stop, which happens sometimes in the heat of battle, he risks going for the block and Shea going for the rib cage and drawing a foul, and as a result, forcing McDaniels out the game earlier, right, if he's in foul trouble, or having to play defense with less aggression, which frees up the game for Shea, right? You attack defenders like that because you know they can't be as physical with you. So I'm anxious to see how those two battle, because if Shea has a harder time getting buckets, this is where J-Dub and Chet come in, right? We saw how J-Dub struggled to score most of the Nuggets series. And unlike Denver, Minnesota still has good defenders off that bench to mix in with McDaniels and Ant in Dante DiVincenzo and Nikhil Alexander-Walker. So even J-Dub can run into any one of those guys. He has the game to hold his own. You know, I have faith in him, but whether they get the J-Dub we saw versus Memphis or the J-Dub we saw versus the Nuggets is going to be a major key if the Thunder want the Larry this season. Chet and Gobert should be interesting because Chet can take Rudy out the paint. And other than the two closeout games, he's had a pretty quiet postseason. He's still effective, but he's going to have his work cut out for him, especially if Chet decides to be aggressive. And lastly, what Naz Reid are we going to get? I said it in the playoff preview, man. Naz Reid can't be putting up 5 points and such after the potential bag he's about to get this offseason. Like, in my eyes, there should be no reason he ain't getting at least 12 every game. They chose bro over Karl Anthony Towns, and it's cool. But both teams are in the conference finals. It's cool, but that ain't cutting it versus OKC. Them 5 points ain't cutting it. You want that bread? You got to show me. So, he's got to consistently be that sixth man that he knows and that we know as fans he can be. So, like I said, I'm really excited for this series in particular. I think I'm most excited for the perimeter defense that we should see from both teams. I think both the Timberwolves and the Thunder have notable X factors that will show up in this series and could even be the players that dictate which teams move on to the finals. And I really hope to see some gritty games because these two mirror each other pretty well. Hence why they are the last two teams standing out west. They each haven't been the best three-point shooting teams in the postseason. They have all-time superstars leading their teams. They have impactful role players. I think I'm more excited for this one more than the Pacers versus Knicks. I can't lie. Meaning my Pacers versus Knicks excitement is definitely at a 10. So that would mean my T-Wolves versus OKC hype got to be at 11. But speaking of which, let's flip it to the Eastern Conference to discuss Pacers versus Knicks. Now, this series is interesting because it's a matter of grit versus speed. The Knicks would love a slower game, and the Pacers would love a faster game. And that's exactly why I believe this series is going to be at least 6 games. It's probably going to be 7. But right now, I feel like if a team can exploit a certain weakness, they can do it in 6. But I think it's going to be a stubborn slugfest. The Pacers should win the games that favor a faster pace, only for the Knicks to win the games that favor a slower pace. The first team to show that they can withstand the other team's pace is going to be the team that wins this series. Now, obviously, this is a rematch of last year's conference semifinals and a long-time rivalry due to their battles in the 90s. The Knicks eventually crumbled to injuries last year, despite a 3-2 series lead before losing in 7 games, so you gotta presume that they have revenge on their minds. That said, the Pacers have looked like the best team in the East and have all the Disney magic that comes with championship teams, with notable game winners from Tyrese Halliburton and insane comebacks, like I said earlier. This team is rarely out of a game. Like, you have to blow them out to defeat them. But I'm just really anxious to see how Indiana plays versus the Knicks, because the Bucks weren't the best defensive team. And like I said, I expected the Cavs to play much better defensively than they actually did. I picked them in 6 games, but I was wrong. They couldn't stay healthy and had weak links in the backcourt. But with the Knicks, that starting 5, especially having more physical, intense defenders like Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, it'll be interesting to see Halliburton, who will likely be guarded by Mikal Bridges, and Siakam, who will likely be guarded by former teammate OG Anunoby, how those guys play. You have to imagine that Tyrese will be looking for Brunson or Cat every trip down. He wants that mismatch. But even with mismatch hunting, there's going to be a good defender on a player that he likes to pass to. And the Pacers did not do well when teams got physical with them. The Pacers' transition means everything this series because I believe the Knicks will make them work in the half court, something that they prefer not to do. Additionally, a series like this, I think, is where guys like Ben Mathurin, TJ McConnell, and Obi Toppin become even more important. There is certainly a lane for the Pacers' depth overcoming the Knicks' lack of depth, numbers-wise. I can envision the Pacers being able to throw various fresh bodies at the Knicks who won't have as many to work with. A smaller detail like that can certainly help Indy play at the pace they want to play at and thrive. The rim pressure that TJ McConnell and Ben Mathurin can provide will also be key, especially when Karl Anthony Towns gets in foul trouble. They're going to look to attack that paint. Obi Toppin is always a sneaky option, and mind you, he's playing against the franchise that drafted him and didn't necessarily use or develop him right. So there's some extra motivation for him right there. Strength in numbers has been a strong point for the Indiana Pacers, and it could definitely be the case in this series as they seek to drain the energy of the Knicks, similarly to how they did last season. Now, on the Knicks side, if they aren't making shots and getting foul calls, the Pacers are going to be off and running. And they don't want that. They already play a short rotation, and their starters play heavy minutes. You spending most of the game running track is going to be irritating. And even with a stronger perimeter defense, as much as I would like to see them play a stiff man defense, they have to be ready to switch everything because of all the pick and roll and dribble handoffs the Pacers are going to run. The Pacers can be so annoying to guard that teams lose their defensive identity. I just talked about it with that Cavs series. If the Knicks aren't on a string defensively, the Pacers could very well find themselves in a couple of those games where they drop 40 in the first quarter. That said, They showed to be a better half-court team than both Milwaukee and Cleveland this postseason. So when the Knicks share the wealth, they're almost always better off. They have good half-court options in Brunson, Towns, and Bridges. And when OG Anunoby gets hot, it can get dangerous. I would like to think the Knicks have a better chance to weather the storms the Indiana Pacers can cause. Because that's the thing I tweeted too. The Knicks are the kids in college who do their assignments last minute because they know they perform better under pressure. So just like we saw versus Detroit and Boston, right? The Knicks will have to, I can envision them having to come from behind at some point. And it just seems like they love to make games extra interesting. But I don't know if you want to do that versus the Pacers. You know, because admittedly, it does bring out the best in them a lot of the time, but I would caution them. They do not want to do that versus the Indiana Pacers because when the Pacers are up, there is no coming back. They have shown time and time again, they always come back. And when they are up, it's that much harder for you to do so because they play so fast. And that kind of brings me to my next point. If the Knicks want to win this series, they have to control the pace for 48 minutes, not 47, 48. There were moments throughout the playoffs where the Knicks missed some pull-up threes in transition. The Pacers are going to eat those up. Like I said before, transition threes are some of the easiest looks a team will get. That's why coaches encourage those. But they also serve as unofficial turnovers. You do a pull-up three when you probably could have got a layup or even just reset the offense, and that hits the front rim, and the other team's off and running, that's just another possession for them to score. You cannot give the Indiana Pacers more possessions. The last thing you want to do is give them more chances to score. In a perfect world, you eat the clock and score, eat the clock and score, eat the clock and score. The Bucks couldn't do that. The Cavs definitely didn't do that. They definitely didn't do the scoring part. But the Knicks actually have the roster to supplement their clock management with buckets. So if I'm the Knicks, and if I'm as stubborn as Tom Thibodeau, I don't care if the score is 89-80. The last thing I want to do is give the Pacers more time. Clock management is everything versus this team. And timely buckets will be imperative in making sure that game plan is a success. And then, of course, another thing I didn't mention is the center matchup between Karl Anthony Towns and Miles Turner. That's probably the matchup to watch because both of them can stretch the floor. Miles Turner may not be able to protect the rim as Cat forces him to step up to the arc. Likewise, Turner being able to stretch the floor is going to force Cat to rotate to the perimeter more often. But even then, could that be a blessing in disguise? Will not having to be the last line of defense inside keep him out of foul trouble? The Celtics had stretch bigs also, though, so maybe that won't make as much of a difference as I think. But the Pacers also don't have the variety of scorers that Boston had. So I definitely got my eyes on this as the series gets underway. Knicks and Pacers should be yet another entertaining and close battle. But as I said, as cliche as it may sound, the team that consistently finds a way to outlast the other team's offensive point of emphasis is going to win this series. It'll be the Pacers if they can succeed in a slower game, or it'll be the Knicks if they can find ways to halt or weather the storm-like Pacers runs that they tend to go on. Now, before we get out of here today, the last thing I want to add regarding both of these conference finals matchups is this. I want you to keep an eye out for this main thing, primarily for Indy, OKC, and a little bit of Minnesota. Who is going to cause the opposing team's role players to work? And I know it's a lot easier for me to say this because I'm not the one going against talented professional athletes. And it is something to consider when watching these specific teams still alive. The idea of depth is a lot more than just how many guys a team plays. It also involves the skill sets of each player who gets minutes. And I said this on my YouTube channel earlier in the year. The Boston Celtics have been the best example of this. They are so dangerous because most of those guys offer multiple skill sets throughout a game. I can go down the line. Drew Holiday had experience as a starting point guard. He played in the playoffs in Philly. He was an all-star. Eventually got combo guard experience with New Orleans. So he knew he could play the two guard. Was a tremendous defensive player, right? Derek White, he had combo guard experience in San Antonio. He played hard on both ends of the court, and Boston gave him that chance to blossom. Al Horford was an all-star before he was this scrappy veteran who can shoot threes. So He had post game. He had face up game. He could defend. He could get rebounds, right? Kristaps Porzingis was an all-star before injuries slowed him down. And even Peyton Pritchard, he got key minutes. If you remember, he got key minutes as a rookie when Kemba Walker got hurt. And early on showed flashes of what he's doing today. And obviously there's Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. They had to learn to stick to a role before they each blossomed as two-way all-stars in this league and leaders of the Boston Celtics. Most of these guys can make plays off the dribble, make plays in the post, make plays for teammates, and play defense. They do all of those things. And when I look at teams like Indy, OKC, and Minnesota, I don't see that across the board. And that's where it gets fun in my eyes, knowing none of these teams are perfect. Aaron Nesmith, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Alex Caruso, Cason Wallace, Isaiah Joe, in some ways even Jaden McDaniels, Rudy Gobert, Lou Dort, they have not carried a versatile offensive responsibility for a team. I think the Celtics showed when they won last year, this is the new NBA. It's hard to beat a team 4 times if they don't necessarily carry weak links offensively. There's always a pick and roll option we can go to. There's always a post up option if we need a post up play. There's always somebody to look for behind the arc. There's always somebody willing to penetrate inside. Alex Caruso, he showed flashes of what he could do, playing for my Bulls in Chicago. And while rare, Lou Dort on occasion, he can score in the mid-range area. Don't get it twisted. But I think most teams would be okay with any of these guys ending a possession as opposed to whoever the star player is. A lot of these guys are used to playing one specific role and are darn good at it. I am by no means trying to discredit these gentlemen. Role players are absolutely imperative to a championship team. You can't have too many cooks in the kitchen. It can get dangerous. But like I said earlier, trying to get into a player's mind here, there's jewelry on the line. We got to make guys uncomfortable. So I would want Aaron Nesmith to try to make a play he's not used to making. I want Lou Dort, Alex Caruso to feel like they have to beat me off the dribble or waste seconds off the shot clock. I don't want these guys getting open spot-up threes and easy layups because I made a lazy closeout. I dare Rudy Gobert to have to score on the block. And while I don't think the Knicks are in the clear, Josh Hart had a lot of good games in Portland. But let's see if he overthinks when he's too wide open. Mikal Bridges learned how to grow his game a bit in Brooklyn. OG Anunoby showed he could be more than a defender in Toronto. But can these guys put the ball on the floor a little more? Can they make the right pass? Can they grow from a playmaking standpoint? So that's something extra I'm keeping in mind as I watch these conference finals. Which teams are going to be the ones that buckle down on defense and discover some of these potential weaknesses in the offense in the effort to disrupt their opponent's rhythm as a unit? OKC did this by forcing Jokic to initiate offense behind the three-point line. Minnesota did this by getting in the chests of Warrior shooters / role players and forcing them to make plays they weren't used to making, and overpassing and getting late shot clock opportunities. Indiana did this by forcing Cleveland to rely solely on Donovan Mitchell. New York did this by outworking the Celtics, getting to the line a little extra, getting to the paint a little extra, getting the edge in those rebounds and 50-50 balls maybe a little extra, and making stronger closeouts on a three-point heavy team. Now it's time to see how these teams can adjust against each other. And with that final verse, we have finally made it to the end of another hefty Hip to the Games episode. From delivering the Pacers' bouquet of flowers, recapping the ups and downs of the semifinals, and previewing the NBA's Final Four matchups, one of the best playoffs in recent memory continues to heat up. But as always, these were just my thoughts. So now I gotta hear from you. You can tweet the show at Hip to the Games or tag me directly on Twitter and IG at @DesmondPowell_ and share your thoughts on any of the topics discussed today, as I would love to hear or read your thoughts. And I want to simply say thank you for listening to another episode of H2DG, all for the love of the best combo there is. Even though I know I haven't been on the hip hop side as much, on the spectrum lately, but remember, basketball is number one. So your boy has been rolling with the NBA content, but best believe once the season wraps up, I'll be gathering that inspiration to cater towards the music you and I love. And of course, here's a huge shout out to you for being hip to the games. Peace out and God bless. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Hip to the Games, and if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit up the socials at DesmondPowell_ and at Hip to the Games on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok so you don't miss out on the fun. And please follow or subscribe to the show and leave a review on the podcast platform you're on right now, as your support is greatly appreciated.